with you. I'm Pastor Philip. I guess I'm Pastor Emeritus. That means I'm old. That is that I'm also a grandpa, so that means I am really old. So there you go. I have one of those nothing is impossible with God kind of moments that happened this week. I am what's called a cross-border worker because I have a U.S. Citizenship and Canadian citizenship, and I work both in the U.S. and in Canada. And about 2 months ago, we solved all the riddle of how to get back and forth without having to quarantine. And so we thought. And so about a month ago, I went back and forth and traveled back into Canada again, no problem. And then Tuesday night, after I flew back in from Philadelphia to Seattle, driving up to the border around 9 o'clock at night, the border guard says, I don't think I'm going to let you in. You're going to have to quarantine. I'm like, I thought we solved that. Here is a letter saying I don't have to. I'm not sure what to tell you. And he says, we'll go park over here. And so 2 hours later, the person who was in charge got on the phone and told me, no, you must go and quarantine for 2 weeks. Well, if I had planned for that, that's fine, but that's not what I planned for, and we thought we had it solved. So I was pretty upset, not like scream, yell upset, but internally I was pretty upset. I went home and very disappointed, and there was a lot of things I wanted to do. One of them was I wanted to speak with you this morning. I wanted to preach this Sunday because Isaac is away, and we want to continue to think about and pray for Isaac. On Saturday was another showing of his dad's funeral and celebration of life. And Isaac is in Spokane with his in-laws and hopefully getting some rest emotionally and physically, kind of getting ready to come back across the border, I think, in about a week or two from now. But anyway, so I'll be speaking next couple of Sundays, and I've got lots of other things planned, and I was like, oh my word, I don't know how to solve this, and I didn't know what to do. So I got home, and that night kind of rattled. The next morning, woke up pretty early. My wife says to me, honey, I don't think we prayed about this. And she's absolutely right, because we didn't pray about it because we thought it was solved, and we didn't realize we were going to get bothered at the border again. Anyways, so I said, you know what, we need to pray. And so we sent out a prayer request to a bunch of our friends and to the leaders of the church and said, would you pray for us? And so God just put it on my heart to go back and appeal when it was daylight, not in the middle of the night when maybe not the best crew is on staff. And so, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go and appeal. And so several amazing little miracles that happened in that appeal were I called, you have to do, well, didn't have to, but I was supposed to at least show them a negative test coming in that would help satisfy some of their concern, even though I'm not required to, but others are. But anyways, so I thought, let me get that out of the way. But the problem is to get a rapid test is really, really difficult or very expensive. And so I called the pharmacy down in Bellingham, and it just so happens that the pharmacist was a guy who lives in White Rock and travels down every day he runs the pharmacy there in Bellingham. And he was like, look, I'm really sympathetic to your cause. I want to help you, but I don't know if I can do it right now. We're booked up. Call me in 2 hours. I'll see if I can make room. And so I called him in 2 hours at 11 o'clock. He says, yeah, come in at noon. We'll take care of you. So that was one major answer to prayer. So then I got to the border around maybe 1:32. And when I got to the border, the guy at the border guard was really nice, but he said, no, I think I want you to go inside and talk to them in there. I was like, kind of sad, thinking, I was hoping this was going to work. And I went inside to talk to the supervisor guy at the desk, and I started to explain what was going on, and he said, no, I don't want to hear that. Nope, I don't want to hear that. Nope, I don't want to hear that. Go sit over there. And I thought, oh, this isn't going well. And so I sat over there in the corner going, well, what's going to happen next? And he calls me up about half an hour later, and he says, nope, everything I see is fine. Your issue is you don't travel every day. Most cross-border workers travel every day, and because you travel 10 days at a time here and there, it looks like you're not meeting this criteria, but we think you're fine. Go ahead. Now, for those of you who hadn't had a quarantine every time you traveled and did your job, then maybe you don't appreciate how big of a deal that is. But that was a really, really big deal and a big answer to prayer. So thank you for praying. And just another response of how God is so good and how he manages things and prayer. One of the big things I want to tell you today, and I hope that you come away with today, is that you can trust God. God is trustworthy, and his word is trustworthy. We live in a culture in a day, really for the last 400 years, has been an attack on the word of God. They've tried to say that people wrote at different times because things that are true in the Word of God must have been written after the fact. They've tried to, what they call deconstruct it and put it in all kinds of different places. They try to take all the miracles out of it. They try to say it wasn't true. But it's interesting, even today, the people in Israel will go into the Bible to find out where the wells are that were listed in the Bible and written almost 3,000 years ago, because the Word of God is true and we can trust it. The Word of God shows us who God is. It lets us know about His character, His nature. It also lets us in on His plans, and it tells us what God's requiring of us and what He's hoping for us to do in the future. And all these things are connected to the Word of God. Otherwise, we're left with our own ideas about God, which most of the world has, their own ideas about God. But the Bible, because it's true, tells us who God truly is and allows us to place our trust in God. And today I pray that as we go through this part of Daniel chapter 8, you will come away with feeling like, I know God is true. I know He knows the future. He holds the future, and I can place my trust in Him. That's our prayer for you this morning. We've been in a series. It's called Not Home Yet, which means exactly that. We're not home yet. We're still waiting to get to heaven. We're still waiting to be with God when He makes all things new. We're not home yet. We're living on this side of heaven. We're living on this side of Him making all things new. So the world that we live in is messy and broken. I don't know about your world, but I know my world is. And the people around me and all the things that I see, a lot of death, a lot of pain, a lot of sorrow, a lot of sickness, brokenness, lots of challenges in life around me. And I cannot wait until I get to where God makes all things new again. But we're not there yet. So we're going to put our hope in the future of what God has promised and what He's doing. And the three things that they've asked us to do in this study, Pastor Isaac's done a great job with it, is we're going to be looking at how to study better the Word of God. We're going to figure out how to never give up. Now, some of you don't know, but if you go online and look at my Facebook page, you'll discover that I'm in a competition with my twin brother. We're trying to lose weight, because you can tell I need to lose some weight. And we're having fun. We're going to lose weight, and those of people who sponsor us, for each pound that we lose, we'll give money. All of the money that we get sponsored would go towards helping new churches get started in different places around North America. So never give up, because when you're like just the basic thing of trying to lose weight, the day you're supposed to go exercise, you want to give up. The day that you have a yummy cake in front of you, you want to give up on your diet. These are things, a normal part of life, but also the bigger things in life. When we're trying to do life, I was talking to a friend last night. Marriage is in trouble, a lot of challenges right now, and she was saying to me, I really feel like giving up. And I can understand and appreciate why she said that, because life is really hard for her. And we want to be able to do, when we read God's Word and we see these studies in Daniel and also in 1 Peter, is that we can learn not to give up, because we can trust the God who's going to give us the strength to make it through tomorrow. And then, of course, we're going to learn about the end. What happens after all this is over? What happens on the other side of death? Those are important things to know, because they point us to what's not just temporal, but what's eternal. And so in this study in Daniel chapter 8 this morning, I think we're going to touch on all three of those things. We go back, if we were to look at Daniel chapter 7 and the other parts of that Pastor Isaac has spoken on, I would encourage you to go back and watch those videos again online at gethope.ca, or go to our YouTube page, and you will see Pastor Isaac did a great job giving some historical background and things related to Daniel chapter 7 and the prophecies that were given there that will really set you up well for the series that's to come. This week, we're going to dig back into Daniel chapter 8, coming off from 1 Peter. We're going to dig back into Daniel chapter 8, and this is a unique opportunity to learn some things that God is going to tell us in the book of Daniel. Now, what we find is Daniel is a Jewish guy who's living in Babylon, because the Babylonians captured the Jews and took the best. And here's Daniel. He's sitting, a faithful person of God, and he's in high leadership in the Babylonian Empire because of his faithfulness. And he has actually interpreted several dreams. He interpreted 2 dreams for the king Nebuchadnezzar, very, very intense dreams about what's to come, very impressive dreams. And now Daniel is receiving visions from God and dreams for himself about what God is going to talk about the future. And so now Daniel is going to receive this vision in Daniel chapter 8, and the first 14 verses are the vision of what God shows him. But what I want to do this morning first, I want to go to Daniel chapter 8 and verse 15 and see the response from Daniel and some things that are happening. So Daniel chapter 8, verse 15, it says, "While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, There before me stood one who looked like a man, and I heard a man's voice from the Ulai calling, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more. No, go back. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. What we see here is Daniel. He's at the Ulai, which doesn't mean anything to you right now, but in a few minutes we're going to see where that is. That's not in Babylon. That's actually in Persia. That's going to be in the capital city of Persia, in Susa. And he's going to be on a little canal that connects two rivers together. That's the Ula, and that's where he's going to be. And there is a man in his vision. This man, we don't know who this man is. We know that this is a man like a man. He's not actually a man. We think that it could be the pre-incarnate Christ. We don't really know. We do know that he tells Gabriel, which is one of the most powerful angels in the Bible, he tells Gabriel what to do. So that gives us a hint about maybe who he is, okay? And he tells Gabriel, now we know who Gabriel is. If you know about the story of Mary and Joseph, well, who came and talked to them? Oh, it's the angel Gabriel. You know, who went to the shepherds? The angel Gabriel. Gabriel was the messenger of God and a very powerful angel. And Gabriel's standing there next to the river, and this man, or the one who looks like a man, tells Gabriel to tell Daniel how to interpret this vision that he just had. And that's pretty crazy. So he says, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision. In verse 17, and as he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. Well, this is Daniel. Can you imagine? You just saw probably the Son of God, and you saw one of the great and most powerful angels in all of heaven, and wouldn't you be terrified? I would be. He says he fell and he fell prostrate, which means right down on his face. And Son of man, Gabriel says, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. Okay, well, we're going to talk more about that next week. This is going to be a 2-week message on Daniel chapter 8. But he's telling Daniel it's not only about what's going to happen next, it's actually also going to be talking about what's going to happen at the end. And that's going to be interesting. You follow that. Keep that in your mind. We'll talk about that next week. So while he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep. Well, he fainted. I think that's what he really meant. I think there's no word for fainted in Aramaic or in Hebrew, and so I think he just simply fainted. Okay. So while he was speaking to me, I fainted, and with my face to the ground, and then he touched me, and he raised me to my feet. Now it's really interesting in the Bible. Whenever you see God, or whenever you see a person interacting with angels, oftentimes people will react in great fear and great concern. Oftentimes they'll fall down and they'll try to worship the angel. But what you'll discover in the Bible is never does the angel allow himself to receive worship. The only time you see that is when you see the angel of the Lord, which we believe is the pre-incarnate Christ. And that when he's there in front of people, he receives worship because he's God. He's the Son of God. And he's allowed to receive worship. But Gabriel doesn't want your worship. That worship belongs to God. And Gabriel he gets Daniel up on his feet. Hey, stop bowing down and worshiping me. Stand up, he says. And he got him on his feet. He raised him to his feet. And he said, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath. Now again, we're going to talk about that more next week. But just kind of make a note in your mind. Here in verse 19, Gabriel is telling him the interpretation of the dream is what's going to happen in the end, and specifically what's happening in the time of wrath. It's a period of time that's going to be about the wrath of God coming on the Jews and on the people of God, as well as the nations of God, the nations of the earth. Because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. So there is a time which things are going to happen. So God is seeing the future. God knows all that's going to happen in the future, and God is revealing to Daniel early on. Now, this is around 540, 541 BC. And Daniel's getting this prophecy while he's in Babylon. So let's shift gears now. We see now that this is what Daniel is getting for the prophecy. He's been told that these prophecies are going to be given to him, and then now Gabriel is starting to give him some explanation. But what was the vision that Daniel had? And we see it now here in verse 1 of Daniel chapter 8. So in the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision, and after that one that had already appeared to me. So, if you know, in Daniel chapter 7, Pastor Isaac's messages, he did 2 messages on that chapter. You'll love to watch those. He did a great job of bringing a lot of historical background about Belshazzar, about these different visions and things. But those visions that the first vision that Daniel had, So Daniel had, now this would be his second vision. The first one was the first year of Belshazzar. Now this is the third year of Belshazzar's reign. So this is now, if you go all the way back to Daniel chapter 5, you remember that amazing story where Belshazzar's having a big party, right? He thinks everything's cool. He doesn't know that the Medes are surrounding his city, and actually they're coming into the waterways underneath the city, underneath the gates that's supposed to hold the waterways. They're coming in underneath there, and they're going to take over. And on the wall of the banquet room that he's having this orgy fest party thing, literally God's hand writes on the wall, many, many tekel upharsin. You have been weighed and counted. And no one in the room could figure out what it meant. None of the wise men of the era could know what it meant. And so they called for Daniel. But see, this is now probably 2 years after Daniel gets this vision. Daniel already knows what's going to happen next. If you read Daniel chapter 5, you'll discover that Daniel doesn't go in there all sheepish like, "Oh, great king, may I subservient myself to you." No. The king says, "Hey, if you can tell me the name of the vision, I'll give you a third of my kingdom." Well, Daniel already knows what's going to happen. He doesn't want anything to do with this guy's kingdom because he knows it's going to be destroyed because of the vision that he sees here in Daniel chapter 8. And so we see it says, in the third year of the reign, King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa. Now that's important because Daniel wasn't working in the citadel of Susa. Daniel was working in Babylon. So what in the world is Daniel seeing himself almost 1,000 miles away to the southeast, okay, in Persia, and in modern-day Iran, sitting really close, to the Indian border? What is he doing way over there in Susa? Why is he there? He's probably never been there. And at this point, this city, Susa, wasn't any big deal. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't on hey, this is the city to go to. No one really knew much about the cities that the people lived in Persia. Why is he having a vision about something he's never seen and never been before, and he can talk about the actual name of the river or the canal that connects the two rivers together? That's amazing. God is revealing to Daniel what's going to happen to him. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But you'll see here, in my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa, in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. So here's Daniel standing next to this waterway that connects these two rivers where boats and ships go back and forth to do commerce. I looked up, and there before me was a ram. Okay, so he sees in a vision, in a place that he's not physically in this place, though he feels like he sees himself in this place, and he sees a ram. Now that's interesting. So a ram with two horns. So here he's at the river. He sees this big ram with two horns, okay, standing beside the canal. And the horns were very long. And one of the horns was longer than the other one, but grew up later. So now we've got these two horns, and one of the horns starts to grow longer than the other one. It's really interesting, okay? Verse 4. I watched the ram as it charged towards the north, towards the west, and the north, and the south. And no animal could stand against it, and none could be rescued from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. This is really interesting. Look now in verse 20. Now Gabriel, later on in the passage, has given the prophecy. He told Daniel what the prophecy meant. He said, the two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. What we know here is that in a couple of years from this vision, we saw the story in Daniel chapter 5, Belshazzar, right? Many, many tekel that night, okay, 539 BC, Persia took over, actually the Medes and the Persians took over the capital of Babylon. And when they took over, there were two kingdoms working together, the Medes and the Persians. They were working together. But the Medes were the ones who led the way, but they were a smaller group. And what we find out is later on, Persia has more and more power. But if you go back to the verse here in a second, I think right here in verse 4, it says, I watched the ram as it charged towards the west and to the north and to the south. Now, what I'm trying to tell you is that this prophecy was given 3 or 4 years before it happened, okay? And then the description of the prophecy is that this ram, which is now, we know, Gabriel tells us is Persia. Interestingly enough, if you were to take a coin of that time period and take a look at what was on that coin, you know what animal would be on that coin, the Persian coin for their currency? No guess? Yeah, it's a ram. That's right. Isn't that interesting? So this ram, okay, which is represented here in this vision that Daniel had. Now, when you see visions, when we look at the visions in the Old Testament and in the New Testaments, anytime you have a horn coming out of an animal, that's usually referring to a ruler or the power of the ruler. The longer the horn, the bigger the horn, the more powerful they are. And so we have two big horns already. The horns are already quite large, as it says from the beginning, two large horns. And then it says that the second horn gets larger slowly, okay? And what we find is the Medes did take over first. They were the ones leading the Medo-Persian Empire. But later on, the Persians, who were larger and more dominant, they're the ones who take over as that empire grows. And it becomes quite powerful. Look at what it says. It says go back. It says it moved from the west and the north and to the south. Daniel's prophecy clearly predicts how the Medes and the Persians were going to take over the Babylonian Empire and other parts of the world. And notice it says it went to the west first. Well, where is Iran from Iraq? It's east of Iraq, but if they're going to go towards they have to go west. They conquered Iraq, and they conquered Babylon. They went west. Then where did they go? They went north. They took over some of the southern parts of what would be modern-day Russia, the stans that we call the different stans there. And then they went south. They went down into the Promised Land and down into Egypt. And that's the order of how they went their campaign. Isn't that interesting? But what is missing here? Which direction is missing? East. The Persians and the Medo-Persian Empire did not expand east. They didn't. This is interesting that the prophecy that was given about how this ram behaved and how it conquered is exactly how the Medo-Persian Empire was formed. It went to the west, and then to the north, and then to the south. And no animal could stand against it. None could rescue it from its great power. It did as it pleased and became great. Let's keep going. Okay. I want you to just give me a blank screen there for a second. So a couple other little things I want to tell you about the Medo-Persian Empire. And one of the cool things about the Medo-Persian Empire is the Medes, inside of the Mede Empire, where they were, whereas a people group, they were priests. They were Zoroastrian priests. And you know what they were called? Think about it. Just throw a guess out there. They were magi. Think about that. 500 years, 540 years before Jesus comes on the earth, we find that Daniel is giving prophecies about the Messiah, about the one who's going to come. And Daniel's prophecies are there, and then 540 years later, when the Messiah comes, guess who comes from the east? From Asia, from Iran, from this part of the world, to go visit the Christ child. The Magi. These are the same people because the prophecies that were given 500 years before are now being fulfilled, and they're coming to celebrate how God has fulfilled the promise that he made and the promises that were given to them through the prophet Daniel, and how God used his teaching in their life. It's really quite powerful. Now we look at verse 5. In verse 5, he tells us this. As he was thinking about the Persian Empire, which is the next thing to happen. He says, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between his eyes came from the west. So now these empires, these nations in the vision are representative of animals, right? And so this goat has this big straight horn in front of its head, and crossing the whole earth. Can you read that out loud with there in your home, wherever you are? Crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. That's incredible. This thing was flying. It came toward the two-horned ram, and I had seen standing beside the canal and charged it in great rage. So it's telling us about the attitude of the goat to the ram. And it charged it with great rage. Let's keep reading. Verse 7. And I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its two horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. Unbelievable how powerful this goat is, how fast it's going, and just how the ram had no power over it. Now Gabriel tells Daniel what it meant. He says now, going down in Daniel chapter 8, verse 21, the shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is its first king. Any guesses who that is? Yeah. Well, he had a great dad. His dad was Philip the Great, okay? Philip of Macedonia. But this is now Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, he was being mentored and tutored by Aristotle, which is incredible. And so Alexander the Great now, being tutored and mentored by Aristotle, his dad is murdered, okay? And he's not quite old enough to take the throne. There's a power struggle going on. And about 5 years later, he takes the throne, okay? And then the next 10 years after he gets the power from, becomes the ruler at the age of 21, when he starts 23 years old, he starts to take over the entire region of the world. An unbelievable amount of speed. He takes over the entire Medo-Persian Empire. And it's interesting, if you go back a couple of verses here, I think it was, let's stay there in verse 7 for a second. What happened is just before Alexander the Great comes and takes over, the Medes and the Persians had been fighting for 50 years, and the Greeks and the Persians have been fighting for over 50 years, and there's a lot of animosity and angst built up into the Greeks. And what we discover is Alexander takes his army, he goes into what's called modern-day Turkey today, he goes across this river, and on the other side of the river, he finds himself confronted with a massive army. The Persians were huge. They had a large empire, and here Alexander only had 25,000 men, and he was now going against almost 1 million men. You know who won? Yeah, it was Alexander the Great. He never lost a battle. He destroyed them. Look what it says. He attacked the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it, and the goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. Exactly how God said it would be. This is now the year 333 BC. This is like 130 years, away from, or actually 230 years away from when Daniel gave this prophecy. It's unbelievable, to the detail of who it is and what happened. Let's go on to the next verse here. Nope, sorry. Is that right? Yeah, okay, you're right. It's verse 8. You're correct. Come back. Thank you. Okay, so now it says, the goat became very great, and at the height of the power of his power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place were 4 prominent horns, which grew toward the 4 winds of heaven. Okay, next verse. I think we're going to see now in verse 22, Gabriel gives us the interpretation. The 4 horns that replaced the one that was broken off represent the 4 kingdoms that emerged from his nation. From his nation, but will not have the same power. So Gabriel, the angel, tells Daniel, hey, this horn is going to become great, and at the very height of its power, it's going to be broken off. And then after it's broken off, there's going to be 4 little horns that come up, and this goat will not be nearly as powerful as it had been when that primary leader was leading. And that's what we find. The 10 years that it took Alexander the Great to conquer the world, he died. He died suddenly, boom. And then all of a sudden his kingdom was like this massive kingdom. And because he was tutored by Aristotle, part of what God did with Alexander the Great was he set up the whole world. Alexander the Great conquered the known world all the way up to China, all the way over to Spain, up into parts of Russia, down into northern Africa. He conquered it in 10 years. It was ridiculous. The speed and the power that he had, he never lost a battle. He was great. And what he did was he made the whole world Greek. We call this the Hellenistic reign. He created a Greek culture, and he put it on everyone in all the places that he conquered and ruled now had Greek culture, and they had to speak the Greek language. And if you think about it now, a couple hundred years later, Jesus is going to come on the earth, and the disciples are going to go, and they're going to share the gospel around the world. And what language do you think was spoken around the world? Greek. Why was that? Because Alexander the Great came and conquered the whole world and told everybody, you're going to speak Greek, and this is how it's going to be. And so he set up all these Hellenistic centers and training centers and all this other stuff, and he challenged the whole world. And so then the rest of the world, even after the Romans took over, were still using Greek as their commerce, their trade language, and the language of education and writing. And so that when the gospel of Jesus Christ was going to the world, it was able to be written in one language, Greek, and the rest of the world could read it. That's pretty powerful. Part of why when Christ came, it was only a couple hundred years after he died, that basically the whole world had come to know who he was. Okay, so that's what happened with Alexander the Great. And then it says the 4 horns grew up. Now this is interesting because the horn got broke quickly, we saw that, and that's exactly what happened, and Alexander the Great died. And then it took about 20 to 30 years for the kingdoms to kind of fight over each other. And finally they settled, and it settled into 4 kingdoms, exactly as it was stated. It says, go up, sorry, go back one. Yeah, it says, so it's grew up towards the 4 winds of heaven. So this is like a compass, north, south, east, west, okay? The 4 winds of north, south, east, west. And so there were 4 kingdoms. There was a northern kingdom, there was a western kingdom, there was an eastern kingdom, there was a southern kingdom. And so this is what happened exactly as it was stated. And so we have this prophecy that was written or given to Daniel, hundreds of years beforehand, and it's now fulfilled exactly as stated. And these 4 kingdoms are coming out of the one Greek kingdom, okay? The 4 generals of Alexander the Great become the rulers of these different kingdoms, okay? So let's go ahead and move ahead a little bit more. And so it says here now, verse 9 rather, it says in chapter 8, out of the one then came another horn, which started small, but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry host down on the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down because of the rebellion. The Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Now that's a pretty powerful thought right there. What does it all mean? Well, what does Gabriel say? Okay? Gabriel says now in verse 23, he tells Daniel, hey, this is what it means. In the latter part of their reign, in other words, the latter part of this Greek reign, this Greek empire is going to be there for a while, but later on, there's going to be a leader that comes up. And when rebels have become completely wicked, in other words, the people have become wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, and not by his own power. And he will cause astounding devastation, and will succeed in whatever he does. And he will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He's going to destroy Israel, okay? I think, and here in verse 25, he will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. And when they feel secure, he will destroy many and take this stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will not be destroyed. He will be destroyed, but not by human power. Now, this is really interesting because in history, what we see is though Alexander the Great came in and took over in 333 BC, it wasn't until like 175 BC, it's like 150 years later, we find this ruler of the Seleucid Empire, this part of one of the 4 pieces where modern-day Syria is today and Palestine. That region was ruled by this leader. This leader's father dies. His brother has the rightful rule to the throne. He goes with sweet talk and everything else to the courts, and he becomes king because he's very clever. And he becomes the king of this region, and he becomes a very powerful king. He starts expanding the region, fighting to the north and to the south and to the east, and he becomes very powerful, and he really hates the Jews. We discovered in the short period of time that he ruled, he killed over 100,000 Jews. This was a very difficult thing, and he did some very, very terrible stuff. He went down to Egypt. He got his tail whipped down there and came back, and he did what we call kick the dog syndrome. You never heard of the kick the dog syndrome? Well, the kick the dog syndrome is this. Dad has a bad day at work. He comes home and he starts barking at mom and giving her a hard time, and she gets upset, and she starts barking at the kids, giving them a hard time, and the kid goes over and kicks the dog. That's called the kick the dog syndrome. You know, when we don't feel very powerful, we kind of keep going down. And what we have here is this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, he goes and he makes himself king by deceit and intrigue, which he does. And then he goes and he gets beat in Egypt by the Ptolemaic Empire. He goes back up and he takes over Jerusalem and he destroys the people. He stops the worship. He takes a pig and he kills it and slaughters it on the altar, and he makes himself the high priest. Now, there's a whole lot more. We're going to get into this next week. So these prophecies relating to this particular person, Antiochus Epiphanes, we will talk more about next week. But for the point I want to get at today is God told Daniel 300 years earlier that this was going to happen. He told him which culture it was going to be, which nation it was going to be, which region it was going to be, what the attitude of the ruler would be, what the behavior would be, and how it would affect the people. In fact, even today, the Jews still have a feast, a festival related to this point. We call it the Festival of Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is related to this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, who shuts down the daily worship, okay? And this is what happens in this season, is now being celebrated by the Jews because God did something great by restoring it, okay? But this is the deep, deep challenge of Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, let's just go to verse 27. I'll read it. Next week we'll talk more about it, but I just want to read it for you this morning. I, Daniel, now this is Daniel after the angel has told him the interpretation, was worn out. How many of you are kind of worn out reading this interpretation? There's a lot here, and we're not giving it full justice with 2 sermons. We probably could stay here for months, but we're going to just give 2 sermons to this passage. But Daniel chapter 8, Daniel has this vision. He now has seen the interpretation. He's been face to face with the Son of God and with the angel Gabriel, and he says, I was worn out. I think I would be too. I lay exhausted for several days. He was just totally gone. And then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. So Daniel he knew what Gabriel had told him, but Daniel isn't living now. He can't look back and see the exact specific things that happened. He just knew what Gabriel had showed him. And he knew that the Greeks and the Median Persians were going to happen, but he didn't know the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. He didn't see everything that happened. He was given this vision. But it's really interesting to me that we live in a day where people don't trust God, they trust themselves. And yet the truth is, we have very little power and very little control over anything. I mean, that was made very evident to me when I was at the border. And the border guards have my life in their hands. And they can send me home to what I call house arrest, they call quarantine. And they had the power to do that. Even if I didn't like it, I was powerless to do anything about it. I'm thankful that through prayer and God, we were able to overcome that. But what I'm suggesting to you today is that that's true for every part of our life. We think that we have all this power. We think we can make all these choices. We think we can do this and that. But the truth is we live in this little microcosm of what all human history is all about. And then we have false ideas about what it means to be trusting God. Well, if I trust God, then life will go easier. Well, I don't know if you've read your Bible, but there's a lot of people who trusted God and God loved, and their life was not easy. You know, when Paul was being beat with rods, when he was thrown in prison, I don't think it was because he hated God and God hated him. But in that point of history, that was what God needed from Paul to demonstrate to us that sacrifice and suffering on this side is what God wants sometimes as it goes to the future, because our future is more important than our present. And so what we know is, how do I know to trust God with my future? Well, what I want you to know is that God keeps his word, and God's word can be trusted. And we see this in the book of Daniel. You take a peek here, just this little thing that I put here. These are just some of the prophecies these are the big ones, the clear ones. But I think if you were much more detailed, you could go through and find easily 30 or 40 specific prophecies that are actually fulfilled in Daniel chapter 8. It's incredible. But let's just go through some of the big stuff here. In Daniel chapter 8, we find that Daniel was told that the Medo-Persian Empire was going to come in, and that how they would go about conquering, and what their conquest would look like, and talking about which one would rise up and how it would work. We saw all of that. Then, that was now only 3 or 4 years removed from when Daniel was told the prophecy. So, okay, we can give that some license. Well, what do you do with 210, 15 years later? Okay, there's going to be another kingdom come in, And this guy, the details of the speed of their conquest, the nature of their battles, the nature of their relationship with the Medo-Persian Empire, the sudden death of Alexander, and the division of the four kingdoms. How do you get past that? That's unbelievable detail. For God made a promise to Daniel. He showed him the vision, and it's exactly how God said it was going to be. And we find ourselves now finding ourselves almost 300 years, almost 400 years removed to Antiochus Epiphanes, 380 years, whatever it is. Now, the prophecy came that he was to come to rule. How he came to rule, how his campaigns went, his defiling of the temple, his stopping of the daily sacrifices, and his unnatural death. All of those things have proven to be true. My friend, what I want to say to you is this is important to know about Daniel 8. But one of the takeaways I really want you to go home with is that God's word can be trusted. And you can trust God. You know, the reality is God, he knows the future. In fact, he holds the future. And my question to you is, are you trusting God? Have you placed your faith in God? I'm going to tell you that he's trustworthy. You know, if he holds the future, my question is, are you letting him hold you? Are you placing your faith in God? Are you holding back? Are you trying to have control of your own life? I'm going to tell you right now, that's not going to work for you. Not because I'm smarter and wiser than you are, just because I have observed life. But what I do know that God keeps his promises. He promised these things to Daniel. They happened. He told us he would send his son, and guess what? Jesus Christ came. And not only did he come, but he died. He died so that our sins would be forgiven because a holy God needed to have something to go against the sin that we do regularly. And he was satisfied with the death of his own son. But that was not enough. Jesus Christ not only died, but he rose again. In fact, he rose proving that he had power over sin and over death, the consequence of sin, which was death. Jesus proved he had power over those things, and he's telling us he's coming back. And as we start looking at these prophecies in Daniel, and Daniel chapter 7, even the prophecy that Nebuchadnezzar had, and then we're going to finish in chapter 8 next week, we're going to see that the prophecy, he's going to come. There's an end. There's something that's going to happen next. And where are you placing your trust today? Not just for today, but for your future, for your tomorrow. I want to strongly encourage you to put your trust in God. Put your trust in him because he's faithful. He keeps his promises. Let's pray.